The jury's out on whether we are currently in a recession or on our way to a recession. However, we are definitely in a vibe session. If you made it through the Great Recession of 2008 and you're feeling like the vibes this time around are markedly different, it's not in your head. Let's talk about it. Aloha, beautiful humans. Welcome to my channel. If you are new here, welcome back if we've been locked in. My name is Sasha, and I did a video last week on the Great Recession in comparison to the recession that we're experiencing now and how Gen Z can take a cue from millennials on how to survive that. So if you haven't watched that video yet, definitely go watch it. But in this video, I wanted to talk about why the vibes feel so different, even though we went through the same thing not too long ago. There's been a lot of debate about whether we are actively in a recession or we're on our way to a recession. And regardless, there are definitely the vibes going on right now make it so that it feels a lot different this time around than last time around in 2008. I think there's a lot going on here that is influencing why the vibes feel so rancid. The first reason is age and awareness. When the Great Recession started in 2008, I was 20. I graduated from college in 2009. And even though I was fully aware that we were in a recession, it didn't feel like it for me. And you don't know what you don't know. And with age, there is a lot of ignorance and innocence. And I feel like I was largely insulated from what was happening around the country. Like I knew the mortgage industry collapsed because some of my friends, their parents lost their houses, but my parents didn't lose our house. I know that there was some tension and stress with the mortgage, but my parents were still paying for private school for my younger siblings. The mortgage payments were still being made. So I really felt like I was insulated from everything that was happening with the Great Recession, even though I was actively reading about it in the news. And the ways in which I was impacted was the job search. I graduated in 2009 and the job market was actively and actually terrible. And it took me a really long time to find a job. Well, a really long time in comparison, right? It took me about 9-10 months to find the job. And while I was looking for a job, I was working at the mall. I was working 3 jobs. But again, even though I knew the job market was bad because I was experiencing it myself, I was working 3 jobs, but I wasn't stressed about making rent payments because I was living at my parents' house rent free. I was still going out with my friends. We were clubbing, we were partying. The music was fire. Like the music from the pop music from like the late 2000s to the early mid 2010s, it was so fun. Like there was so much energy happening. I was still going out with my friends. I was clubbing, I was partying. You know, I was actively aware that the economy was bad, but I didn't feel personally impacted by it. I was still very hopeful that things were going to get better, especially after I found a job. I was just happy to have a job. And then eventually I moved out of my parents' house and even though I was still rent poor, I was still going out and I was having a good time. Like things didn't feel as expensive as they are now. It's expensive to go out. Like I feel like every time Snowbay and I go out anywhere, if we go out and have a meal, like 2 entrees, maybe 2 or 4 drinks, it's close to $150. And again, that may be because we're living in, you know, the DC area where it's just more expensive. The cost of living is a lot higher here. But I remember the days of going out to bars, clubs, restaurants, and I was maybe spending like on a good night, on a ballerific night, I was spending maybe $100. I knew things were bad, but because I was so young and I didn't really have a lot of life experience, I was really excited for what I felt was on the horizon. Things didn't look so bleak. Fast forward to now, this recession, it's very bleak. Like the outlook, it just seems that there is such a growing gulf between the haves and the have-nots. And you see younger people, especially, feeling very bleak and hopeless in a way that I don't feel my peers were, at least people in my network that I was observing around me. Like I didn't get that sense of hopelessness and just there is no promise of tomorrow. There's no greater sense of hope. Things aren't going to get better. You know, I never felt that negativity, that kind of negative, just sad vibe from the people around me. That's not something I really experienced. So it's kind of jarring to me when I'm seeing on social media or just even talking to young adults, you know, people in their early to mid 20s, and they feel that sense of hopelessness. I think it's really sad that people are feeling that way at such a young age because of the economy and everything that's going on in our society. You know, people aren't going to clubs, they aren't going to bars. I'm like, what do y'all do? I do understand in part it is because Gen Z is drinking a lot less in comparison to millennials and Gen Xers and boomers. However, there is also the component of the loneliness epidemic that is impacting young adults. And I think some of that absolutely has to do with the fact that the economy is so bad that a lot of people feel like they cannot afford to go out. And we've gotten rid of a lot of third spaces, a lot of hangout spaces, affordable spaces. And this isn't to say that Gen Z, they can't just like go and hang out with their friends on their couch. You know, every time you go out, every time you spend time with someone, it shouldn't be exclusively to just go out and spend money somewhere. You should be able to just like enjoy each other's company outside of a bar, a club, a restaurant, whatever. But it is nice to be able to have those experiences with your friends if you want to have them. And it sucks when you feel like because you are not making enough money, you cannot afford to do these things. And I see that sense with Gen Z, especially, at least what is being shared online and in conversations that I'm having with Gen Z who are in my immediate network and circle. And then you take into account the job market. The job market now is so much worse than it was in 2008. When Obama was inaugurated in January of 2009, the unemployment rate was 7.8%. And when he left office, it was 4.7%. Even though the job market was the worst it had been since the Great Depression due to Obama inheriting a pretty terrible economy, there was this distinct era of like hope with Barack Obama that we have not seen since he left office. I remember finding out that he was running and reading all of the comparisons to John F. Kennedy and the excitement that we were going to have a young president in office, somebody who was ready to embrace hope and change. Like there was this need for new, especially coming off the heels of a Bush administration and the war in Iraq. Like that time was so, I wish I could like describe it because I know in my body what it feels like, but I don't think that there were enough. I don't think I could like accurately describe it outside of just the shift in energy, a much needed shift in energy. And it seemed like the administration was fully aware of what was happening in the country, how it was impacting Americans. And Obama saw that and made good of his campaign promises of hope and change. He implemented the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, the WIOA, which promised new efficiencies and the ability to innovate in order to meet the needs of our rapidly changing world. He also implemented job programs like the Bridge to Work program and the American Jobs Act. The Obama administration showed that they cared about Americans and removing barriers to work as well as keeping jobs in America. Their goal was to get Americans working. The administration actively initiated programs to help people out of joblessness, while the administration, this current administration that we're in, seems hell-bent and driven on doing the exact opposite. Many of the Trump administration's government job cuts, estimated at 200,000 positions, has caused $22 billion in lost federal wages nationwide this year alone. In light of the tariff announcement, the stock market dropped to its lowest since 2020, another large drop that occurred during Trump's presidency, except that was his first administration. Yes, the stock market has not reached the scale of the most significant crashes in American history, but with the looming threat of tariff and increasing unemployment rates, time will tell. When you think about the scope of what's happened over the past couple of weeks, when you think about it, I think it also seems so jarring because it's only been 3 weeks and this is just the beginning. When people feel this sense of bleakness from especially looking at the job market, they're not wrong. It's not unfounded. What's so frustrating sometimes is when you express these feelings, at least when I see millennials and Gen Z expressing how they feel so bleak and hopeless, especially Gen Z, they're actively being gaslit as if they are not able to read and see what is happening all around them. We are living in a time where now more than ever before in history, we are able to see the realities people are living all across the globe. And I brought this up in the video that I did on how millennials can help Gen Z survive the recession, or some cues that Gen Z can take from millennials. So I'm not going to get too much into it. If you're interested, definitely go watch that video because I get more into the weeds. But I definitely think social media plays a huge role in the Vibecession and the vibes being seriously off and the bleakness that a lot of people are experiencing, because we are able to see it in a way that we weren't able to before. When I reference being younger and going through the Great Recession in 2008, my network was people around me. Like, yes, social media was a thing, but it was mostly like Facebook, Instagram here and there. And even using Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, you were largely seeing people you knew posting. You know, you weren't seeing celebrities or influencers unless you were actively following them. But the Instagram algorithm has changed so much to the point where now you're not even seeing the content of people you're following. But that wasn't the case back in the day. That wasn't the case back in the early days of Instagram, Facebook too. So social media was a very insulated kind of experience where you're mostly seeing people in your network. And so because a lot of my friends were not having horribly negative experiences as a result of the recession, it didn't seem that bad to me what was going on. Now we have social media and it makes it so we are hyper aware of what everyone is going through. And now that you're hyper aware of what everyone is going through, you're also simultaneously hyper aware of what you don't have. And the fact that there are people in the same age group as you, in the same demographic, living vastly different lives, living vastly more comfortable lives, more affluent lives, and they're doing a lot better than you. And when you are rationing out bills and rent and toilet paper and food, and you see somebody going on a brand trip or eating a $20 strawberry from Erewhon or posting their hauls, it can be very jarring to see and also very bleak. And not just jarring to see, but also create this sense of hopelessness within you, especially if you are comparing yourself to others, which is why I always say comparison is the thief of joy and social media isn't real. Like, yes, there are absolutely people who got it like that and it's not a flex for them. Like, they are living how they say they're living and they have what they say they have. However, you never know what anybody is doing to get the things that they have or show off the things that they're portraying and displaying on social media that they may be renting or is not theirs or is stolen. You know, we never know how people are. You generally don't know, especially people outside of your network. You don't know what they are doing to get what it is they look like they have. So I don't believe that we should be jealous of people or feel envy all of a sudden when we see people with things we don't have. However, it would be tone deaf to just say, oh, just ignore it, right? We are living in a hyper visual, hyper aware society, and social media is absolutely, I would say social media is honestly the biggest tell that that the vibes are very off. But I think social media is also driving why people are feeling so bleak, so low, so like destitute. Social media is showing us that we're in a Vibecession, but it is also creating the Vibecession. I remember the days where I was budgeting literally food. Like, some weeks I had $20 to buy groceries. And so I used to buy these like tuna cans and packets of tuna and like ramen and anything that was going to stretch for as long as possible. I was taking toilet paper, like, not that I don't work there and I haven't worked there for like a long ass time. I remember I would just take rolls of toilet paper or just like take a lot of toilet paper off of the spool and put it in my purse so I would have toilet paper, because there was a time where I literally could not afford toilet paper. So I imagine it's like very jarring when you are living this existence where this is your reality and you hop online and you see somebody talking about hundreds of dollar hauls. You know, it can be very jarring when you are pinching pennies or taking the bus while somebody is taking Ubers every single day, everywhere they need to go, or hopping on private jets, and they're the same age as you. I think something that also plays a part in the Vibecession that is more palpable and noticeable today than it was when I was in my 20s is the idea of work. Like, not only just work, but how we work and what work should look like, along with a work-life balance. There was a time where it was normalized. Your entire identity was surrounded and based off of what you did for a living. Not only what you did for a living, but you would be at work basically from a 9 to 5 in one standard setting in the office all the time. And that's not necessarily the case anymore. So much has shifted as far as it pertains to our idea of work and how we work in a pretty short amount of time. I came up in the era of hustle culture. Busyness was seen as a flex. There was all of this, I'll sleep when I die. You were expected to have multiple jobs or at least be working on multiple projects. Gig work was really huge. We were constantly going. And it was not only was that not sustainable, but it was pretty toxic and unhealthy. Hustle culture and busyness, it was seen as a flex and was to be expected. However, over COVID, many people for the first time developed a semblance of a work-life balance. COVID forced a lot of people to sit down and just pause and stop. And not only did it force a lot of people to sit down and kind of take a break, how we work also shifted with the introduction of remote work and telework. You weren't in the office all day, every day. Some people shifted to a hybrid work model where they were in the office maybe 2 or 3 days a week, and then they were working from home the other days. There was more flexibility in how you worked, and that caused people to kind of step off of this rat wheel. People were slowing down and finally developing a sense of work-life balance. And honestly, a lot of people were happier. There has been this misconception and perception, especially with this administration, that we need to get people back to work because people weren't working. And that couldn't be further from the truth. People were still working. People were actively working. We live in this system of capitalism where it's not possible for people to just not work. So people were working. It's just that the way that we work shifted. And because it shifted in such a short period of time and not everybody was able to benefit from it, I think that created this sense of, not only did it create this divide of people again pushing this narrative that if you are working from home or working in a hybrid model, you weren't working. I think it also created this sense of, if I have to go into the office and suffer, or my job, I can't do my job remote. Not everybody should get the luxury to do that. Telework and remote work, it was seen as a luxury and not as a redefined and reimagined way we could change how and what work looked like. And when you're trying to introduce something new to people who are so set in their ways, it's kind of really hard to keep that going and push people towards a change, especially if it's not going to benefit the most amount of people or everybody. There's this divide now between white collar work and blue collar work, but what is being done, and I don't know if people realize it, but that divide only exists to keep people, the 99%, fighting amongst each other, while the 1% benefits from your labor, regardless of whether the labor is happening in a white collar environment, at an office job, or a blue collar environment, at a factory or a non-office setting. We are still, the 99% are being pit against each other. And it's like so frustrating that more people do not realize that is exactly what's happening. For as many people talk about class consciousness and class solidarity, the minute somebody perceives someone is doing better than them, even if they're just making 15 cents more than them, or they're able to work from home one day, all of a sudden people shift their attention of focus to the person who they perceive to have more than them in an attempt to take away that more, so that person isn't doing any better. It's like this crabs in a bucket mentality that definitely create really rancid, terrible vibes. Over COVID, we embraced more hybrid remote work, telework models that created and helped people maintain a work-life balance. However, that has been stripped away in the blink of an eye, and not just in the public sector, but in the private sector. With return to the office mandates, work-life balance has been turned on its head. And not only has it been turned on its head, it's created this sense of fear amongst people who are still employed, especially if you are employed in the government sector, because there is just this palpable fear where any moment you could come in and not have a job, or you feel like you're on the chopping block next. Because we are now living in this environment of fear and unemployment, the mentality has taken over that people can't even complain or share very valid concerns, because at this point, people will just say, oh, you should just be happy to have a job. And to keep it by any means necessary, regardless of the toll it is taking on your overall quality of life, your work-life balance, your family, or your overall health and wellness. We have created an environment where people can't even talk about negative things that they're experiencing, or harmful things, or frustrating things, or confusing things in the workplace, because people will just come and say, oh, be quiet. Yeah, at least you have a job. Do you know how many people are looking for a job? There would be so many people happy to take your job. And the 1% who created this environment and culture of fear around unemployment, they are cultivating this perspective that everybody should just be happy to have a job. And the rat wheel people were finally feeling comfortable enough to step off of, now they're back on it. And has productivity skyrocketed? No. But what has skyrocketed? Anxiety and feelings of hopelessness and bleakness. And then you take into account inflation and the cost of living. Like, yes, you have a job, but because of inflation and the increasing cost of living, your money is not going as far as it could or would back in 2008. Inflation and the increased cost of living combined with stagnant wages is absolutely another thing that makes this recession or Vibecession feel a lot worse than 2008. You're doing the same amount of work, probably more, but you're not making any more money. Meanwhile, the cost of everything is going up. Not only does that impact your ability to pay bills and save for your retirement, it also impacts your social networks and your relationships with people. Again, I'm not saying that the only way to spend time with someone is to go out, go to a club, go to a bar, go to a restaurant, be always going out, sending your money out into the economy. However, when you are not able to socialize in the way you want, or even vacation, it can definitely be a very just frustrating existence where it feels like all you're doing is living to work instead of working to live. I was reading an article recently how in the DC area, a lot of restaurants are saying they are now feeling the squeeze and the pinch as a result of all of the federal employees being fired and let go. Those federal employees would be spending money and pouring it back into the local economy. But because they are unemployed, underemployed, or on unemployment, they're trying to save money wherever they can. And once you start saving money, once you start tightening the purse strings, all the extras are going to go. That Friday happy hour you may have gone to with your colleagues, that's now been replaced by Safeway bottles of wine in your house, on your balcony, on your patio. When people think about the cost of living and inflation, I think a lot of people look at it from a very myopic, from a very singular perspective of how it's impacting just your bills, your retirement, your 401k, looking at it from that perspective, but they're not looking at it how it impacts the greater economy as a whole. I think this has definitely created this palpable sense of, what am I even working for? Why am I working so hard when I can't afford the necessities? I can't afford the extras, fine, but I can't even afford the necessities of life. And this vibe didn't really exist in 2008, at least for me. I want to say, and I'm saying distinctly for me, because as a millennial, I was in my young 20s. I was seeing what was happening from the perspective of somebody who was freshly graduated from college. I ain't got no kids. I don't got a mortgage to worry about. I don't got rent to worry about. So that is the case for a lot of 20 somethings. And even still with that, not worrying about a mortgage, not worrying about rent, just freshly graduating off of college in a time where you should be excited for what life has in store for you. It has been replaced by this sense of fear, frustration, and overall just hopelessness. And that's really depressing to see such young people feel so hopeless about life and their future, and that their country is not creating the conditions where they can be happy and have a career and lead just a happy life. Youth and age was the first thing I brought up, because youth and age absolutely shapes your perspective. When you're younger, your sense of time is different. You have this perspective that you have all the time in the world to accomplish anything and everything you want. Time is limitless, so you're not stressed about retirement. Even as I entered my mid-30s, I've been putting money in my 401k. I've been putting money in my retirement since I was in my 20s. I was not actively thinking about it. But now that I'm entering my late 30s, like this year, I will officially be in my late 30s, my perspective has started to shift a little bit. I looked at my 401k last week when these tariffs were announced and the stock market took a tumble, and I was like, I opened it, looked at it, and immediately closed out, because I was like, this is about to become a 201k and I can't let this impact my mental health right now. So we are logging off. Now that I'm entering my late 30s, my perspective has shifted. I think about the fact that I'll likely be retiring, hopefully, prayers up, 20 to 25 years from now, hopefully sooner. And then on top of that, if I want to have a kid, if I want to be a mom someday, I want to give them a certain quality of life because they didn't ask to be here. So the very least I could do is provide for them, go above and beyond to give them the things that they absolutely need, but also the things that they may want. And I think about how that will impact my retirement as well as my ability to save and provide this child the life that they absolutely deserve. You know, would I still be able to live in a major city? Would I have to go out to the suburbs? Would I have to live in a more rural area? You know, taking into account the cost of living, inflation, mortgage, rent. You know, I think about so much more at this point in my life than I did in my early 20s. When I was in my early 20s, I didn't really have this sense of having to have it all figured out. And I think that is so different and contrary to what a lot of young Gen Zs in their mid 20s and early 20s are experiencing now. There is this mentality and perspective and push for a lot and pressure that a lot of Gen Z feel to have everything figured out by the time you're 25. And I think that goes hand in hand with the rampant ageism that is present online, that is present on social media, but especially amongst Gen Z. There is this mentality that you are old the second you turn 30. And so there's this pressure to have it all figured out by that age. And I think along with the ageism that is present on social media, the fact that so many mid to early 20 somethings are living vastly stark differences, it's like crazy to me. Social media amplifies extremes, but it seems like Gen Z are living two starkly differences. You're either broke and you're struggling, or you're catching flights, not feelings, and you're traveling and you're vacationing and you're able to go shopping every single day. Like, social media, again, amplifies the extremes. So there are probably Gen Z who are living just normal experiences. Like, I think that's the vast majority of the Gen Z I interact with on a daily basis. They're just living like normal experiences. However, what we're seeing on social media are Gen Z who are living two extreme lives. And one of them is just so it's kind of really dystopian if you think about it, right? Because you have two groups of people experiencing vastly different things. One group is struggling and feels hopeless, and then the other group is like, everything is fine. This is the roaring 20s all over again. We're doing great. Constantly being inundated with these images, with these extremes, I believe that it not only impacts, but it also amplifies the anxieties of Gen Z who are going through this depression now, or at least Vibecession, which we should absolutely be paying attention to. When I say we should be paying attention to, millennials, yes, but especially Gen Xers and boomers. A lot of the negativity and dismissiveness that was thrown the way of millennials back in the Great Recession, you know, the 2000s and the 2010s, that is now being thrown the way of Gen Z by boomers and Gen Xers. And I'm starting to hear and see the same patterns and talking points being repeated. Oh, they're lazy. They don't want to work hard. They're spoiled. They're entitled, blah, 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 blah. All of the negative things that Gen Xers and boomers were saying about millennials, they are now saying it to Gen Z. And it's like, no. Like, something is happening here, and y'all gaslit the hell out of millennials, and you're not going to gaslight Gen Z the same way. I remember feeling very irritated by Gen Xers and boomers who would dismiss the very valid concerns millennials we were talking about during the Great Recession. And I see the same punching down and dismissiveness of Gen Z happening. Now, do I think an attitude and perspective shift is necessary for some Gen Z? Yeah, I do. I would be lying if I didn't say that there are noticeable differences within the Gen Z cohort that I do not see in the millennial cohort that would account for some of the perspectives Gen Z are experiencing and sharing. Absolutely. However, Gen Z is entitled to their feelings, and their concerns should not be invalidated or dismissed. We live in a culture of suffering, and I do not think the response is, oh, I suffered and I struggled and things weren't easy for me, but I pulled myself up by my bootstraps and I made a way through, so you're just going to have to do the same. I don't think that's an answer. And I think it is very weird that just because you struggled means that you want to see somebody else go through the same struggle. That's not where my mind goes to. to at all. I think about some of the experiences that I have, and that's in part what I do on this channel. I think about some of the experiences that I have, and if I can share them in hopes that someone else won't have to experience it, or it'll make their reality different, that's what I'm going to do. So I don't understand people who have suffered, and because of their suffering and their bitterness over the fact that they've suffered, they want other people to go through the same thing. I don't get that. That mentality and way of being has always been very weird to me. Again, I think this goes back to the culture of suffering that is very American and puritanical in nature. We live in a culture where struggling is glorified. However, this struggle is largely unnecessary. It is not helpful. It doesn't build character. It doesn't build grit. It builds people who are frustrated, scared, and feel like they have been let down by their country. Not just by their country, but the adults around them who were supposed to run things, but have run things into the ground. And then when you talk about the fact that they run things into the ground, you gaslight them and tell them to be quiet and just be grateful. You know, this struggle is largely unnecessary, and that's what makes it so frustrating, because it is a result of so many things that were and are largely controllable and fixable, from corporate greed to elected officials and administrations who should be working for the people. This time around absolutely feels different from the Great Recession of 2008. The vibes are off. They're beyond off. The vibes are rancid. And if you've been feeling that way, this video is to let you know it is not in your head. You are not making this up. When you're young, you generally have more of a sense of hope and a promise for tomorrow. And like I said, I think it's a really sad state of affairs to see young adults feeling so bleak about their future while actively being gaslit that everything is fine and they're just entitled and sensitive, when all they're doing is speaking about their reality. During the Great Recession of 2008 and through the 2010s, people punched down on millennials and told us to just pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, and told us that we were overreacting and being dramatic, and that we were just being lazy and da-da-da-da-da. And while I personally didn't feel as hopeless, the circumstances were completely different. I feel like we had an administration that was working for us, that was aware of what was happening, and was trying to create a better society. And that is the exact opposite of what we are experiencing and what we are seeing now. Now, when Gen Z, when people in their early to mid 20s are now feeling a sense of hopelessness as a result of what is happening around them, this is not the time to gaslight them out of their experiences and say, oh, just think positive and think differently and shift your thinking. Yes, a shift in thinking may need to occur, but there also needs to be serious shifts in our society, in our economy, because what we've created is unsustainable. It is impacting a generation in a time where they should be excited for life and hopeful for life. They are feeling the exact opposite, and they should not be gaslit out of what they're experiencing. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk. I would love to do a TED Talk someday. But anyways, thank you for watching. Drop down in the comments. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know your perspectives. Are you a millennial who survived the Great Recession? And are you feeling it now? Or are you feeling the vibes are off and that we had it a little bit better because we didn't have social media and we were not seeing everything that we're missing? Or are you a Gen Z who is like, thank you for validating exactly what I'm feeling? Drop it in the comments. I want to know it all. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel, because what are you waiting for? You made it this far. You might as well subscribe. And until next time, peace out.